All right, so let's resume. So far we have defined the law, looked at some categories of law. Then legal systems, two legal systems. We went through the Constitution, the two important Constitution acts. We've just discussed about the branches of government. And now very briefly, we will discuss how laws are made by the politicians. So politicians, and I say MPs, members of parliament, or MLs, members of the Legislative Assembly. What do? They initially introduced a bill, and bill is the technical word for the proposal for a new law. Proposal for a new law could be a new law, or it could be the change of a current law. So like when Trudeau years ago, almost 8 years ago, proposed that the criminal code would be changed. So possession of a small quantity of marijuana wouldn't be a criminal offense. So when there is this proposal, technically this is called bill. So this proposal is initially introduced, and then there will be a debate. After debate, there may be modifications or not, and it will be approved. Now, once it is approved, it needs to get the royal assent. Royal assent means the signature. So that it becomes law. So here there's a graph, and again, this is very, it's just a brief explanation. In the textbook, you can read more thoroughly. So for example, let's think about the federal level. So in federal level, there's a proposal, there's a bill, there will be first, second, third readings, and then there's a vote. If it's defeated, the bill dies, there's no law. If it passed, there may be another vote may defeat, dies. The Governor General will sign. If it's signed, yes, it's law. If it's not signed, it's also dead, defeated. So this is an interesting graph to understand how laws are passed. And similar, not the same, but similar at a provincial level. So first, second, and third readings, if defeated dies, no signature will also die, or if they are passed. Now, last year, no, 2022, 2 years ago, January 2022, the employment law was changed in BC so that employees have nowadays, since January 2022, 5 paid sick days. Before January 2022, there was no paid sick days. There was sick day, but they were unpaid. If you had paid sick days in your job, it was a benefit your employer was giving to you. So before 2022, the government, the provincial government, proposed that the members of the Legislative Assembly, they would change the Employment Standards Act in a way to grant 5 paid sick days to employees in BC. There was first, second, third reading. It got royal assent and it became law. Okay, so it's another example in the provincial level. So that's how statutes, written law, pass or come into existence. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention to you, but those slides that you have crossed title, I keep them because they come from the publisher, but I don't emphasize them. Even some content, I think, like here. If you want to skip, if you want to read for information, it's fine. But if you want to skip, it's also fine. Okay, but I keep them just in case you want to read. Now, with regards to indigenous rights and self-government, so it's important to keep in mind that Self-determination and self-government, they are inherent rights in Canada, and Canada is now part of the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So Canada is part of this declaration. Their right of self-government was never extinguished. They still exist, and there's about 22 self-government agreements, and those agreements are mostly between the federal government and the First Nations, but could also be provincial government with First Nations. Okay, so those agreements, they recognize a wide range of Indigenous jurisdictions or places, and they involve 36 Indigenous communities across Canada. Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, so the most current Constitution Act, recognizes and affirms and confirms the existing Indigenous and treaty rights. And Canada is moving more and more towards to recognizing rights of Indigenous peoples. But again, it's not my intention to tell you that the law makes the world perfect. So yes, Canada has to still do a lot to them. Now, this is the last topic of the lecture. But this last topic will be divided in two. Why divided in two? Well, there's two different streams of legislation when we talk about rights and freedoms. And I have highlighted them. I also have made them bold to you. One stream is when the government abuses on our rights and freedoms. So the government is abusing. Another stream is when there's discrimination at society at large. So if I discriminate you because of your ethnic origin, religion, gender, whatever ground it is, I am not the government. So it's the second stream of legislation. Now, if the government violates our rights, when a police officer searches my backpack without a warrant, this is a violation of my right. Then it's the first stream. We cannot confuse both. Okay, so we start first by looking at abuses by the government. Well, abuses by the government, they are now prohibited because of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Remember that they came into existence in 1982, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, they are part of the Constitution. In other words, the Charter is also supreme law. It's one of the most important laws in Canada. Okay? Now, because of the Charter, our rights are protected by judges now. So let's get back here. When we look at the branches of government, I told you that no branch is more important than the other, right? But the Charter says that the courts, they will have the final word if the government abused on our rights or not. This does not make the courts more important, no, but it just highlights the role of the courts to have a final word. Okay, so that's what the Charter did initially. Our rights are now protected by judges. Now, if I believe that the government abused on my right, violated my right, who will protect me? The courts, the judges. How do they protect me? How do courts protect me? I have to start a lawsuit. I sue the government. I start a lawsuit and I say, hey, court, the government violated my right. The court will decide whether the government actually violated or no, they did not violate it. Okay, I'll give you some examples in a minute. Now, section 32.1, you don't need to memorize this, but section 32.1 says that only the government, the charter only applies to the government. So if I discriminate on you, the charter doesn't apply because I'm not the government, you are not the government. Okay? Now, this section 1 is important. Section 1 is used by judges, by courts, when they decide a violation of the charter. So I sue the government because the government has censored my opinion. I have an opinion against Trudeau, let's say, but the government has censored, did not allow me to publish my opinion. So there's censorship. So I sue the government. The courts, they will analyze using section 1. Well, the first question the court will answer is this a violation of João's right or not? If the court understands that it's not a violation, let's say my opinion is full of hatred, is an opinion about a criminal offense, they say, no, it's not a violation. If it's not a violation, my lawsuit is dismissed. I lose the case. Now, if the court understands that, yes, it's a violation because opinions cannot be censored before they are published, then courts will have to answer a second question. And the second question is based on section 1. So the first question, the court said that, yes, it's a violation. Now they go to a second question and they will ask, is this violation justifiable in a free and democratic society? If this violation is justifiable, they allow the violation. If it's not justifiable, they say no, it's a violation. And they strike down that abuse. I'll give you some examples. Mandatory vaccination policy may be a violation of our right to life. Section 7 of the Charter. The courts, not now in COVID, but during SARS back in 2000, the court said, no, it's not a violation. Well, it's a violation, but it's justifiable in a free and democratic society because it's an unknown issue at that time, SARS. Now, remember, it's not because the courts decided like this that you have to agree. You may disagree, but that's the court's decision. Just the beginning of the year. Have you heard about the truck convoy in Canada? You are new immigrants, but there was a truck convoy, I think going from Alberta and several other places to Ottawa to protest. At a certain moment, Trudeau decided to freeze the banking accounts of some people. Allegedly, it was the best remedy to stop them from committing illegal activities, etc., etc. So one association sued the government, saying that freezing the banking accounts was against the charter. And there was a decision, beginning of this year, that the judge said, yes, it was a violation. Accounts could not be frozen. The government could have done something different.
Was that abuse of power?
Violation of the charter. I don't remember the specific
Term.
not term, but justification, but the understanding was it was a violation of the charter. Now, this specific decision is not a final decision. It's a trial judge's decision, but the government has appealed, and there will be another decision in the future. But I'm giving you two examples. One, that it was not a violation, mandatory vaccination at that time, and now this one, the freezing of accounts is a violation. Okay? Keep this thing in mind. When the government abuses or allegedly abuses, the courts will have the final word. How do courts have a final word? The affected people or parties, they sue the government. And then the judges will decide. Okay? So now, some of the rights and freedoms we have under the Charter. We have freedom of conscience, religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, expression. Now, these are aimed to avoid abuses, violations from the government. So yes, we all have freedom of expression, for example. The government cannot censor us. But it doesn't mean we are free to express anything we want. If you express that I am a drug dealer, my B-law instructor is a drug dealer, and then I sue you for defamation. And then you say, no, but it's under my freedom of expression. Yes, you can express. But if your expression causes someone else's harm, damage, you are accountable for that damage. So that's how you have to understand. Yes, we have freedom of opinion, expression, but they have to be exercised within the parameters of the law. Does it make sense? Freedom of peaceful assembly, association. The convoy protest in Ottawa. Could they get together and protest? Yes, they could. Could they be together committing criminal offenses, destroying public premises, etc.? No, they could not. We cannot. We can get together after class and we can go out protesting about any issue we want. But we cannot use this peaceful assembly freedom as a means to commit a criminal offense. If we do so, we are responsible for the consequences of that criminal offense. Does it make sense? Democratic rights. Well, there has to be an election every 5 years. That's why there will be an election coming in Canada. It's going to be 5 years. This is to avoid dictatorship. This is to keep democracy in Canada. Mobility rights. We have the right to go and come. So some people back during COVID, if you were in Canada, during COVID 2020, there were some health orders from the health minister of BC, and gyms were closed, restaurants were closed, we could not leave, we could not have guests in our house. Potentially, those health orders were against our mobility rights. If I disagree, I would sue the provincial government. I haven't seen any cases on this, but that's an example. Legal rights. So, Section 7, we have the right to life. Right to life is the right that people use to claim that mandatory vaccination is a violation of the Charter. Right to life means that no needles if I don't authorize. It cannot be mandatory. But again, the Supreme Court of Canada, back in 2000, they decided that mandatory vaccination policy is a violation of the Charter, but is justifiable in a free and democratic society because it's temporary. Okay, that's the Supreme Court's decision. Sorry, not right to life. Sorry, it's security of person. Sorry, right to life is different. Section 8 and 9. Unreasonable search, unreasonable seizure. That's why I told you, if they try to search my backpack, it's illegal. It's against the Charter. Now, there were friends driving from BC to Ontario years ago, and police officer pulled them over to check the driver's license and insurance papers, and police officers decided to search the car, and they found 35 kilos of cocaine. 35 kilos of cocaine. All people in the car, they were arrested, were prosecuted, they were found guilty, tried, appeal, and this case reached the Supreme Court of Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada said, hey, the cocaine cannot be used as evidence because it was in unreasonable and arbitrary search and seizure. I personally disagree with this decision because the cocaine was there, 35 kilos. But it's my personal view. On the other aspect, you see how the Supreme Court of Canada protects the rights from the Charter. Very strict interpreting it. If it's illegal, it's illegal. Exclude the evidence. Those friends, they were acquitted. Even though they had 35 kilos of cocaine. You don't have 35 kilos of cocaine for consumption. It's drug dealing, it's trafficking. But they were acquitted because of the Charter. Okay? Now, if a police officer wants to search my backpack, I know I have no illegal things here, but if I had, I could allow them to search. And if they found anything, I would try to have the evidence excluded from trial based on the Charter. This is not legal advice, okay? It's just sharing here. Legal information based on the rights. Equality rights. So Section 15 of the Charter prohibits discrimination. And by prohibiting discrimination, so provinces and even the federal government, they passed human rights laws. Also, the equality right says that laws have to be applied equally to all. So again, that's the rule of law in the Charter. Language rights. French and English, they have equal status. Equal status. So when you arrived in Canada, you saw the signs at the airport in both languages. They have equal status. And then immigration officer, now we speak with the machine, but the officers, they greet us in both English and French because federal services have to be available in both languages. Now, Section 52 of the Constitution, this is just to emphasize what I told you before, declares the Constitution of Canada as the supreme law of Canada. So there's no law that is more important than the Constitution of Canada. And as I told you, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is part of the Constitution. So the Charter is also supreme law of the country. All right. So these are related to abuses by the government. Are we clear on that? If the government allegedly violates or abuses on our rights and freedoms, we sue the government in courts. Courts, judges, they will have the final word. Now we have human rights. So now I'm going to talk about that second stream of legislation. Now I'm going to talk about the situation in which I discriminate on you, or a company discriminates on me when I apply for a position, for example, or a security guard at a bar does not allow me to enter because the way I'm dressed or because of any of the protected grounds. So now I'm talking about discrimination at large by society. I'm not talking about the government involved. Well, when this happens, we apply human rights law. If it's in the federal level, we apply the Canadian Human Rights Act. Federal level means that industry sectors that are of importance of the federal government. So banking, interprovincial transportation, security, those are sectors that are of federal importance. So this Canadian Human Rights Act will apply. With regards to provinces, like in BC, we have the Human Rights Code. So if I discriminate on you here in class, the Human Rights Code would be illegal. Now, guess what? What are the protected grounds? Well, some of them are gender, religion, ethnic origin, race, age, disabilities. Disabilities can be both or any of physical or mental. Okay, cannot be discriminated. So when a discrimination happens, we don't sue. The victim doesn't sue. The victim will file a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal. So when there's discrimination at large in society, the courts don't get involved in principle. It is the Human Rights Tribunal. The Human Rights Tribunal is a specialized tribunal. They are not part of the court system, but they function similarly to courts because they can render decisions, they can impose sanctions, and they can also render any remedies. So it could be that there could be a correction order, training order, compensation, public apology. Many orders are available from the human rights complaint procedure. So again, there's a tribunal hearing, not courts. And then you could ask, why? Why do we not sue? Why do we only sue when the government abuses, but not discrimination? Well, it was the option of the politicians. When they passed the human rights law, they decided to create a specialized tribunal that will deal with human rights issues. So they are specialized. They have knowledge, expertise. They are experts in human rights legislation. Now, if you have any of this protected grounds, we all have gender, we could have religion, ethnic origin, race, age, etc. There's a duty to accommodate. So if I come to BCAT, my associate dean, and I say, hey, I'm suffering from mental issues. I have a doctor's report. It's not just my claim, it's real. They have to accommodate my mental situation. Their duty to accommodate is to the extent that it does not cause them an undue hardship. If it causes them an undue hardship, then they wouldn't need to accommodate. Okay, so employers, businesses, they have a duty to accommodate under those protected grounds. All right, one last question, and we'll call it a day. Which one is wrong, incorrect? Don't be shy and don't be afraid to make a mistake. The rights and freedoms guaranteed in the Charter, they vary depending on whether a person is a citizen, resident, or a visitor. What do you think? Is this right? Is this a right statement or wrong? Wrong. Why?
Doesn't depend.
Can you vote as a visitor? As a visitor, you cannot vote. So this is a simple example that, yes, A is a true statement. It does vary. The rights and freedoms, they vary depending on whether we are a citizen, resident, or visitor. Right? And this is not discrimination. It's just because as a visitor, you are protected from some rights and freedoms, but not all. You are not entitled to the democratic rights, for example. Okay? Yeah, let's go on. Remedies available to the victim, they are restricted to those listed in the Charter. False? This seems to be false. So remedies available, they are those listed in the Charter. We didn't talk about remedies available. So judges When they are rendering decisions based on the charter, they may render any remedies as they find fit or suitable to the situation. But okay, let's say you didn't know this one. So let's go by exclusion. You know the first one is a true statement. We're looking for the incorrect one. C, the charter gives a court power to exclude evidence that has been obtained in violation of the charter right. Is this a true statement or false? That's true. The example I gave you about cocaine, the court actually excluded the cocaine. When evidence is obtained in violation, the court must exclude. So that's the same thing. It's also true. The court is free to impose any remedy for a charter violation that it considers appropriate. Yes, the court, there's no restricted list of remedies available. No, courts may give any remedies they find available. So also by exclusion, B would be the right answer. Because B is it B? Yes, B is the false statement. Okay, so this one was a bit more challenging, but again, I'm using not only the quizzes, but also those study tip questions for us to practice how you should think about them in questions. All right, so summarizing and finishing. So we worked through a definition of law. We looked at categories, legal systems, the Constitution. We looked at indigenous rights and self-government. We ended with the Charter and human rights legislation. Now, let me just stop here. Then stop recording.